I grew up in a quiet, unassuming town where life seemed to move at a leisurely pace, yet the undercurrents of drama were always present. My parents were traditionalists. Dad, a disciplined, no-nonsense man who worked in local law enforcement, and Mom, the warm-hearted anchor of our family who often volunteered at the community center. From a young age, I learned the value of structure and integrity, qualities that, ironically, would be tested repeatedly in my adult life. My first real taste of betrayal came at 12 when my closest friend Mark lied about breaking Dad's prized fishing rod. I discovered the truth by accident and confronted him. Though it seemed trivial, it planted the seeds of mistrust that would shape how I viewed relationships. Mark and I drifted apart, and by high school, our connection was nothing more than a distant memory. During high school, I discovered my love for civil engineering, drawn to the idea of building structures that would stand the test of time. Around the same time, I met Laura. She was in my sophomore science class, a bright, tech-savvy girl with a quick wit and a smile that could light up a room. We started out as friends, helping each other with homework and sitting together at lunch. By junior year, our friendship had grown into something more, and we began dating. Laura quickly became a central part of my life. Not just my girlfriend, but my confidant and partner in everything. From late-night study sessions to weekend adventures, we were inseparable. By senior year, I believed we had something truly special, a relationship strong enough to withstand any challenge life might bring. As the years went by, subtle shifts began to emerge at home. Laura, who had always been the embodiment of focus and determination, started to seem more distant. Years together became less frequent, often postponed or canceled with vague excuses about work commitments. Her once lively and engaging demeanor grew quieter, and there was a certain detachment in her gaze that I couldn't quite understand. I tried to attribute it to the pressures of her demanding job. She was excelling in her career after all. But a quiet, persistent unease began to take root deep within me. It wasn't until weeks later that these suspicions began to harden into something undeniable. There were whispers, little signs I'd been too distracted to see clearly, and then, on a day that started like any other, a chain of events began to unfold that would shatter the illusion of stability I'd clung to for so long. It brought me to that moment, standing by my car, waiting to confront truths I could no longer ignore. Perched on the front of a car parked near license plate 128, I waited quietly. The sound of a door creaking open caught my attention, and soon they emerged. Her movements deliberate. Her gaze briefly landed on me before darting away, her face drained of all color, as if caught in an unthinkable act. Sliding off the hood, I noticed him lifting his hands in an almost defensive gesture. My voice was calm but firm as I said, "Don't worry, neither of you is worth the trouble." Without another word, I walked toward my car, got in, and drove away, leaving them to their unease. The path to that moment was a long one. Jim and I met when his family moved in next door. We were both 8, the only boys in a neighborhood full of girls our age. Naturally, we became inseparable like brothers. By the time 4th grade ended, we had each other's backs and everything. Little leagues, soccer, and every misadventure in between. Through high school, our bond never wavered. If you messed with Jim, you dealt with me, and vice versa. By senior year, we were still going strong. Jim was dating Annabelle Spears, and the 4 of us often went on double dates. On prom night, Laura and I took the next step in our relationship in one room, while Jim and Annabelle did the same in another. After graduation, life took us in different directions. Jim chose the Navy over college. Annabelle was furious, calling him every name in the book, but still promised to wait for him once he settled at a duty station. Meanwhile, Laura and I went to college, me at Eastern Michigan University for civil engineering, and her at the University of Michigan for it. The two campuses were only a half-hour apart, so we kept our relationship alive, though not without complications. There were cracks, subtle at first. Laura canceled plans a few times, claiming she had too much studying to do. Friends at her school told me otherwise, that she was going out with other guys. One night, I saw it for myself. I arrived unannounced and watched her climb into a car with some guy. I followed them to a restaurant on Ann Arbor Road, waited 10 minutes, and then went inside. I spotted them tucked away in a corner booth, sitting close. His arm was around her, and she didn't seem to mind. I took a seat at a distant booth where I could observe without being noticed. Laura's reaction was immediate once she heard my voice as I ordered. Her eyes widened, and she quickly pushed his arm away. The confusion on his face said it all. This wasn't their first outing. They were comfortable enough to be close in public, and she hadn't expected to get caught. I stayed calm, finished my meal, and left without confronting her. The next day, I skipped our Friday night date without explanation. I turned off my phone and enjoyed a quiet evening with a good book. On Saturday, I went to a party, met a gorgeous brunette named Robin, and got her number. Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang. It was Laura. She marched past me as soon as I opened the door, demanding answers. "Where were you Friday night? Why didn't you answer your phone?" I leaned against the doorframe and said, "Which question do you want me to answer first?" Her brows furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You asked 3 questions," I replied calmly. "Pick one. Don't play games." "Rob." She snapped. "What's going on?" I sighed. "Fine. Friday night, I stayed in. Saturday, I went to a party, and as for the phone, I turned it off." Her expression darkened as she crossed her arms. "Why didn't you call me if you weren't coming?" "I figured you'd already made other plans with your boyfriend," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Her jaw dropped. "What are you talking about? You're my boyfriend." "Then who was the guy at the restaurant Thursday night?" I asked, folding my arms. "He's just a friend. Sitting close, his arm around you. That's just friendly." My voice sharpened. "If it was so innocent, why didn't you come over and say hi? Maybe introduce us?" She fired back. "Why didn't you come over if it bothered you so much?" "I wanted to see how you acted," I said flatly. "Because people keep telling me you're seeing other guys," I replied. I needed to see it for myself. Her frustration boiled over. "You don't know me, Rob. We never agreed to an exclusive relationship." I stared at her, stunned. "I thought we did. I gave you my class ring and Letterman jacket as a sign of commitment." She shook her head, exasperated. "That's high school stuff, Rob. It doesn't mean anything now." I nodded. "Fair enough. If it doesn't matter to you, it doesn't matter to me. I met someone at the party Saturday, and she gave me her number. Maybe I'll call her." Laura's face twisted in anger. "Fine, do what you want," she snapped before storming out. As I watched her leave, I realized she didn't apologize, make excuses, or even try to salvage our relationship. To her, the rules had changed. It hurt to let go of someone I'd been with for so long, but it was better to face the truth now than drag things out further. I had a ton of homework earlier in the week, so I didn't get around to calling Robin until Thursday. We chatted for a while and set up a date for Friday night. I picked her up, and after dinner, she suggested skipping a movie and heading to a party she'd heard about. The party was at an apartment in Belleville. We arrived a little after 8, and wouldn't you know it, fate had a sense of humor. The first people I saw as we walked in were Laura and the guy she'd been with the previous Thursday. "Oh great," I muttered under my breath. Robin noticed immediately and leaned closer. "What's wrong?" she asked. I nodded subtly toward a pair of people across the room. "Them," I said quietly. She frowned, puzzled. "Do you know them?" "I know her," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Ever heard of Miss Piggy?" Robin blinked. "Miss Piggy? That's her nickname." "Yep," I confirmed. "She's got a reputation, a real mess. Someone came up with it, and it stuck." Robin gave me a skeptical look. "Are you sure she deserves it?" I shrugged. What else would you call a girl who's supposedly planning to marry her boyfriend, but sneaks around with other guys when he's not around? Her expression hardened slightly. Do you know that for a fact? No, I admitted. Not firsthand. But I've heard it from enough people to believe it. Robin tilted her head, studying me. And how do you know her? She asked cautiously. I hesitated before answering. I was the guy she claimed she was going to marry. At least until I caught her with that guy last week. Robin's eyes widened. Wow, so firework tonight. Nope, I said with a shake of my head. We broke up on Sunday. It's over. She raised an eyebrow and smirked. What are the odds you'd have asked me out if last Thursday hadn't happened? Pretty slim, I admitted, meeting her gaze with a faint smile. But Thursday did happen, and we're here to enjoy ourselves. Let's go do that. She smiled, took my hand, and led me across the room to introduce me to the host. Laura, standing off to the side, noticed me immediately and froze. Her expression was a mix of shock and unease. I couldn't tell if it was because she didn't expect me at this kind of party, or because she felt guilty about being with someone new. Either way, I ignored her as Robin introduced me to Gary and his wife, Artisan. We made small talk before heading off to grab drinks. The basement had been turned into a dance floor, and Robin and I spent most of the night dancing and meeting new people. Every now and then, I caught Laura watching me, her expression unreadable. Around 11, Robin said she needed to call it a night since she had things to take care of the next day. We said goodbye to our hosts, and as I drove her home, she commented, "Your ex spent a lot of time looking at you tonight." She was probably just surprised to see me there. I replied. Robin shook her head, her expression thoughtful. No, I think she was uncomfortable seeing you with someone else. I shrugged, unconcerned. That's her problem. She's the one who ended things. Maybe so, Robin said, glancing toward the woman in question, but she didn't seem too happy about it. She'll have to get used to it, I replied, my tone matter-of-fact. Robin turned back to me, a teasing smile playing on her lips. So, does this mean I'll be seeing you again, or are you planning to date every girl you meet? I smiled, meeting her gaze. I prefer one girl at a time. I had a great time tonight, and I'm definitely going to ask you out again. As long as you say yes. You'll be the only one. Robin raised an eyebrow, her tone playful. What if I'm not ready to settle down with just one guy? Then you'll say no, I said with a grin, and I'll find someone else. If that doesn't work out, I'll circle back to you. Rinse and repeat until I find someone who's all in. Robin laughed, her eyes sparkling. I like your confidence. Let's give it a shot. How about tomorrow night? Perfect, I said, smiling back. When we got to her door, she surprised me by saying, I usually don't kiss on the first date, but I guess there's a first time for everything. She kissed me softly and added, see you tomorrow. When I got home, Dad was still awake. As I walked through the door, he glanced up from the couch. Laura called, he said. I shrugged. It's late. I'll deal with it in the morning. The next day, I slept in. By the time I stumbled out of bed, it was late morning. Mom was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of tea. Laura's already called twice, she said, looking at me pointedly. Not until I've had coffee, I grumbled, heading for the coffee pot. Mom raised an eyebrow. Things aren't going well between you two, huh? I poured a mug and leaned against the counter. It's not just us anymore. Mom tilted her head. Does she know that? She should, I replied. She's the one who opened that door. Before Mom could say more, the phone rang again. She picked it up, listened for a moment, and then handed it to me. It's Laura, I sighed, taking the phone. What? I said, not bothering to hide my irritation. Why didn't you call? Laura demanded, her voice sharp. It was late when I got home, and I just woke up, I said evenly. That's not what I meant, she snapped. Why didn't you pick me up for our usual Friday date? I set my coffee down. We talked about this last Sunday, Laura. You said we weren't exclusive anymore, remember? So I decided to take your advice and see other people. That's not what I meant, Rob, she protested. You should have known that. Don't give me that, I shot back. I saw you with that guy last Thursday. I wasn't with him, Rob. I went to the party alone, and he just happened to be there, she insisted. Right, sure, my tone was cold. It doesn't matter anymore. I've been hearing all kinds of stories about you, like how you earned the nickname Miss Piggy. That's not true, Rob, she exclaimed, her voice shaking. Whatever you've heard, it's all lies. After what I saw at the restaurant, I said, cutting her off, sorry, I don't believe you, and I'm done. Give me back my ring and Letterman jacket. They're meaningless to you anyway. Goodbye. I hung up the phone feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. Someone who had overheard the conversation gave me a small nod. She made her choice, she said softly. And so did you. Meanwhile, Robin and I started spending more time together. Around the same time, I was getting letters from Jim. He'd completed boot camp and was training for the Navy SEALs. He never mentioned Annabelle, so I didn't either. Not that he'd want to know. Annabelle had been with a string of guys since he left. Eventually, she disappeared completely. The next I heard, Jim had finished his training, was stationed in Norfolk, and planned to marry her. He wrote, "Wish you could be my best man. But we had to move fast to get on the base housing list." Poor guy, I thought. The moment he steps out the door, she'll have someone else in her life before the echo of it closing even fades. Thanks to a college fund set up by my grandparents when I was born, I wasn't hurting for money. It covered tuition and even let me rent an off-campus apartment. By the start of my junior year, Robin and I decided to move in together. It gave me a glimpse of what married life might feel like, and honestly, I loved it. After 6 months of living together, I started thinking about taking the next step, making things permanent, although a part of me worried that what we had was too good to last. Robin gave no hint that she wasn't as committed as I was, at least not until I suggested she start looking for an engagement ring. That's when she dropped a bombshell. After graduation, I planned to move back to California and marry my childhood sweetheart, who was currently studying in England on a Rhodes Scholarship. We have an open relationship, she explained. We'd agreed it wasn't realistic for two young, healthy people to go years without being close with someone else. He knows about you, and I know about the English girl he's seeing. It shouldn't change things for us in the short term. But of course it did change things, at least for me, I replied. Overnight, what I thought was a romantic relationship turned into something more like a friendship. While I valued Robin as a person, I needed more than just fun and casual companionship. Over time, we started to drift apart. 4 months later, almost to the day, Robin confronted me. "You don't want to be here anymore, do you?" I'd admitted that I didn't feel comfortable staying and explained why. "I'm sorry, love," she said softly. "I almost wish I didn't love Alex so much. If it weren't for him, you'd be my first choice." "Thanks, I guess," I replied. "So what do we do now? Flip a coin to see who moves out?" She shook her head. "No need. I've been expecting this. My mom still hasn't rented out my old room. She says she's keeping it for me until I turn 40 or until she has grandkids, so I'm the one leaving." "Friends?" she asked. "Always." She hugged me, then whispered, "One last night together, please." A week later, I was back at home, trying to adjust to life without Robin. On Friday night, as I worked on an article for school, Mom called up the stairs. "Rob, someone's here to see you." I went down and found her chatting with Laura. "I'll leave you two alone," Mom said, disappearing into the kitchen. "Hi, Rob," Laura said tentatively. "Hi," I replied. "What brings you here?" Laura shifted awkwardly. "Robin called me. She said you're back on the market and suggested I should hurry if I wanted to be first in line." I frowned. "Why would you even want to be in line?" She sighed. "There wouldn't be a line if I hadn't been so stupid. Robin never would have existed in your life if I hadn't messed up. I just want to come back to where I belong." "Where you belong?" I asked, puzzled. She held up her hand. showing me my class ring still on her finger. "I never gave this back," she said. "There's a party at Alice Johnson's house tonight. Wanna take me?" At the party, Laura made a show of holding up the ring. "Just so everyone knows," she announced, "I've reclaimed what's mine." After the party, she was unusually quiet on the drive home, staring out the window. When I pulled up in front of her house, I asked, "Do you want to go apartment hunting with me this weekend? Splitting rent will be cheaper than living in motels." She glanced over at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Wait, are you asking me to move in with you?" I gave her a small smile. The thought has crossed my mind. She tilted her head, considering. "What time should I be ready?" "At 9. I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. She grinned. "Good, you've got a date." Laura and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment midway between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. We converted the second bedroom into an office, where we set up desks for her computer and my work. About a month later, Jim came home on leave, and he and Annabelle often hung out with us. They seemed happy together, which made me wonder if I'd misjudged Annabelle's character. But after Jim returned to Iraq, Annabelle wasted no time moving in with another man. A few weeks later, she was spotted with yet another guy, a former boyfriend. Gossip swirled about her hosting wild gatherings and engaging in questionable behavior. I thought about telling Jim, but Laura talked me out of it. "Rob, it's not our business," she said. "For all we know, Jim and Annabelle have an open marriage. It happens in the military." "That doesn't sound like something Jim would agree to," I said. "Even if it's not," Laura replied, "do you think he'll thank you for telling him? He loves her. He'll just blame you for ruining everything. Let it go." Jim returned from Afghanistan just in time to be the best man at my wedding to Laura. Afterward, he and Annabelle moved to Norfolk for the final months of his service. When he was discharged, they came back home, and Jim found work with a construction company. For 2 years, they seemed happy. They often visited Laura and me, and there was no sign of trouble. When Jim took a 4-month job in Alaska, everything unraveled. Annabelle quickly started seeing another man, Gary Mellows, Jim's boss. By the time Laura and Annabelle crossed paths at their doctor's office, Annabelle was 7 weeks pregnant, even though Jim had been gone for over 3 months. The truth reached Jim through mutual acquaintances. He flew home unannounced, rented a car, and parked near his house. When he saw Gary enter the house, Jim waited 15 minutes before walking in with a digital camera, ready to catch them in the act. 15 minutes later, an ambulance arrived in response to an emergency call, taking Mellows to the hospital. When the police showed up, they were ready to arrest Jim until he showed them the photos on his camera. Jim had been using a camera set to continuous shooting, and the series of images clearly captured Mellows lunging at him. While Mellows may have been trying to grab the camera, the photos made it obvious that Jim was acting in self-defense. The officers accepted Jim's explanation and left. 20 minutes later, Annabelle emerged from the house with a single suitcase and locked the door behind her. The divorce process was swift and uneventful, as was the lawsuit Jim filed against Mellows for alienation of affection. Jim also filed a maltreatment suit, claiming Mellows had hired him only to send him out of town so he could pursue Annabelle. Mellows could have settled out of court and avoided the public spectacle, but he chose to fight. This decision backfired spectacularly, exposing his actions to everyone. The jury ruled in Jim's favor, awarding him $1.3 million. After covering court costs and taxes, Jim walked away with just over $750,000. He used the money to pay off his house, install an in-ground pool, and buy a new Ford F-350. Once the divorce was finalized, Annabelle vanished, and rumors spread that she had left town. Mellows, meanwhile, had to sell equipment and property to cover the judgment. His business took a hit as clients deserted him, unwilling to trust a man who betrayed one of his employees. With some money left in the bank, Jim approached me with an idea. "Why don't we start our own company? We can scoop up the business Mello's lost. You handle the design, and I'll take care of the construction. Laura and I discussed it, crunched the numbers, and decided to go for it. That's how RJ Constructors was born. The partnership worked well. We not only picked up many of Mello's former clients, but we also beat him out on several major projects. Jim made sure everyone knew, and we outperformed Mello's, fueling our reputation. The next 5 years flew by. Jim dated casually, but never found anyone he wanted to settle down with. He spent a lot of time with Laura and me, often joining us for outings with his latest girlfriend. Life was good. Laura's career was thriving. She'd risen to a regional manager position and was a top contender for a VP role. I didn't think things could get any better. Unfortunately, I was right. One Tuesday, after wrapping up a lunch meeting with a potential client, I was approached by none other than Gary Mellows. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked. I didn't hold any personal grudge against Gary. As far as I was concerned, if Annabelle had thrown herself at him, it wasn't entirely his fault for giving in. I never fully bought into the story about him scheming to send Jim away. I always figured Annabelle probably visited Gary's office under the guise of picking up Jim's paycheck and made her intentions clear. "Sure," I said, accepting his offer. As we sat down, Gary started the conversation casually. "How's business?" "Not bad," I replied. "Could always be better." "Ever thought about selling?" he asked. "Selling? Why would I do that?" "To make Jim my partner," I laughed. "Are you serious?" He opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and handed it to me. "Take a look." Inside, I found several photos. The first showed Laura and Jim holding hands as they entered a motel room. The others captured them leaving the motel, kissing or hugging in public. My stomach dropped. Gary leaned back in his chair. "I'm sorry. I hired someone to follow Jim to dig up dirt for payback. When the private investigator gave me these photos, I didn't know she was your wife. But I knew from the rings she was married, so I had the investigator figure out who she was." I stared at him, stunned. "Why? You were guilty of what Jim accused you of." Gary shrugged. "Not exactly. Yes, I had an affair with Annabelle, but I didn't scheme to send Jim out of town. She came to my office, shut the door, and started taking her clothes off. She told me, 'You send Jim away, so you'll have to take care of me while he's gone.' What was I supposed to do? I'm single, and Annabelle was persuasive." He paused for a moment, then added bitterly, "As far as I'm concerned, this is Jim's fault. Everyone knows Annabelle's reputation. He should have seen it coming." I let out a frustrated sigh. "Regardless, you slept with her. Why go after him now?" "Because he ruined me with that lawsuit," Gary said, his voice hard. "And I want payback. I'm just sorry you're caught in the middle." I gestured toward the photos spread out on the table. "How long has this been going on?" "The investigator says at least a year," Gary replied. "Maybe longer." I shook my head, disbelief creeping into my voice. How could it have gone on for so long without me knowing? Gary leaned forward, his tone almost sympathetic. "If she never gave you a reason to be suspicious, how would you know?" I studied him for a moment before asking, "So why do you want to buy me out? What's your end game?" A slice of smirk spread across Gary's face. "As Jim's partner, I have equal say in every decision. If he wants to do A, I'll push for B. And since I'll have access to your pricing, I'll make sure my other company underbids you on every job. I'll bankrupt the business and leave Jim with nothing." I frowned. "And you?" Gary's smirk widened. "I've already done the math. If the company fails, I'll recoup most of my investment by selling the asset. Plus, I'll profit from the contracts my other company takes away from you." I clenched my jaw. What if Jim decides to retaliate? Gary chuckled. "Let him try. I learned my lesson after that first confrontation. If he comes at me again, I'll be ready." He stood up and tossed one last remark over his shoulder. If you're interested in selling, let me know. I left the meeting reeling. How could Laura and Jim have been carrying on behind my back for over a year? I'd never seen a single sign of dissatisfaction from her. To me, everything in our relationship had seemed perfect. What had I missed? I couldn't dismiss Gary's evidence, but I also couldn't trust it completely. He had every reason to manipulate the situation for his own gain. Determined to know the truth, I contacted a friend at an insurance agency and got a referral for a private investigator. 13 days later, I had confirmation. On Wednesdays, when Jim was supposedly visiting job sites, he was actually meeting Laura at the Comfort Inn on Melrose. How she managed to slip away from work for these rendezvous was beyond me. My task now was deciding how to proceed. Deep down, I already knew what I wanted to do. It was just a matter of figuring out how to execute it. After a 2-hour meeting with my lawyer, I had a clear understanding of my options. We lived in a no-fault divorce state, which meant everything would be split equally. My biggest concern was ensuring that Laura didn't get a dime from the sale of my share of the business. To make that happen, I realized I'd have to bend the truth. Even so, she would still likely get some of the money. I struck a deal with Melrose to sell him my portion of the company. On paper, it appeared I sold it for 1/3 of its actual value, and that portion went into a personal bank account under my name. The remaining 2/3 went straight into an offshore account I'd set up beforehand. The arrangement was that Melrose wouldn't step into the office or occupy my desk until the next morning. Once everything was set, I handed Laura and Jim their respective documents. Divorce papers for Laura, citing infidelity, and a lawsuit for Jim on the grounds of alienation of affection. Even though no-fault laws applied, I could still file for infidelity, which might sway the division of assets in my favor, depending on the judge. For the infidelity claim to stick, I needed solid proof. Comparing the private investigator's reports from Gary and my own detective showed that Laura and Jim consistently met at the same motel, always on Wednesdays. My investigator rented a room and set up hidden cameras to capture their activities. A generous tip to the motel staff ensured that Laura and Jim would be placed in that particular room. On Wednesday morning, I called Maria, our receptionist, and told her, "Let Jim know I won't be in this morning. I've got a dentist appointment, and if I'm not feeling up to it after the extraction, I may skip the afternoon too." "Got it, boss. Honestly, you should just go home and rest. Dental work is no joke," she replied sympathetically. After Laura left for work, I returned to the house and let the locksmith in to change all the locks. By 9 a.m., the job was done. I then went to the bank and drained our accounts, including the safety deposit box. My lawyer had advised me to only take half, but I was in no mood to play fair. Screw Laura. She could fight for her share later. I also withdrew the amount I expected to receive from the business sale. If Jim wanted it back, he could take me to court. For now, I had the upper hand. At 12:10 p.m., my detective called. "They've arrived. Room 128, he said. I drove to the motel, met briefly with the detective, and parked outside the room. Sitting on the hood of a nearby car, I waited for them to emerge. When they finally did, I had a brief confrontation before walking away. As I left, another man approached them and served them with papers. Laura's packet included divorce papers and a temporary restraining order, barring her from coming within 500 feet of me or the house. To get the restraining order, I had to fabricate a story that I had overheard them plotting against me, discussing my insurance policy and the value of my business assets. There was a pending hearing to determine whether the order would become permanent, but in the meantime, she couldn't enter the house without court approval, and I had no intention of giving her a key to the new locks. Jim's packet included a lawsuit for alienation of affection, along with a short pointed note. "You know how these things work, don't you? How does it feel to be on the receiving end for a change?" As I drove away, I called Melrose. "It's done. Enjoy your first day in the office tomorrow." From there, I headed straight to the airport, parked my car in long-term parking, tossed my phone in the glove compartment, and boarded a flight to Cabo San Lucas. For a week, I focused on scuba diving, relaxing on the beach, and clearing my mind. When I finally turned my phone back on, it was flooded with voicemails, mostly from Laura, though Jim had left 4 messages too. I wasn't interested in hearing from either of them. Would I have liked an explanation? Sure, but I'd already decided to put them behind me and move on. Their reasons for betraying me were irrelevant. I wasn't going to let them take up any more space in my thoughts. After checking in with my lawyer to let him know I was back, he informed me that Laura had been trying to contact me nonstop, desperate to retrieve her belongings. At first, I considered letting the court supervise her visit to the house. Then, a better idea struck me. A way to mess with her. I called her myself. "What do you want?" I asked. "I need to get my clothes and other things from the house," she said, clearly frustrated. "The court staff won't let me break in, and I don't have a key." "You don't need to bother," I replied coldly. "I donated everything to Goodwill. I didn't want any reminders of your lying, cheating self in my home." "You had no right to do that," she shouted. "I had every right," I snapped, "just like you had the right to stab me in the back." "We're done, Laura. Goodbye." Of course, all her belongings were still in the house, but the satisfaction of messing with her was too good to pass up. Later, I called Maria, our receptionist, to check in on the company. "How's everything going over there?" I asked. "For me? Not bad," she replied, her tone dry. "For the company, a total disaster. Jim and Gary are at each other's throats all the time. They argue about everything, no matter how trivial. Jim orders materials, and the moment he leaves the office, Gary cancels the orders. Nothing's getting done because they're too busy fighting." She paused, then added with a hint of amusement, "I even resigned last week, but Gary doubled my salary to convince me to stay. Honestly, I'm just here for the chaos now." Maria paused before adding, "You should have stayed, Rob. Why did you sell your share to Gary?" I explained the whole situation to her. After a brief silence, Maria replied, "Well, now I have even more reason to stay." "And what's that?" I asked, curious. "To make Gary's life easier," she said bluntly. "I never liked Jim. He was always inappropriate with me, even threatening to fire me if I didn't go out with him. I shut him down, but he made things miserable for me. Honestly, I'm glad he's finally getting what's coming to him. I wish you told me sooner," I frowned. "There was no need," she said with a shrug. "I handled it. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened with Laura. But maybe it's a blessing in disguise for both of us." "How do you figure?" I asked. "It means you're single," she said with a teasing edge. "And maybe I'll finally get my shot." I laughed, surprised. "I thought you were engaged." "I was until 3 weeks ago, when I caught him doing what Laura did to you." "Well, Maria," I said, smiling despite myself, "when I'm ready to date again, I'll make sure your name is at the top of the list." "I'll hold you to that," she said playfully. "In the meantime, don't be a stranger." That day, my phone rang endlessly -16 times in total. 14 calls were from Laura and 2 from Jim. I couldn't fathom what Jim could possibly have to say that I'd want to hear. If he was looking for something from me, he was out of luck. Without a second thought, I deleted all the calls, ignoring any voicemails they left. By the time I got home, I felt oddly at peace. I cooked dinner, poured myself a drink, and decided to check in with Gary Mellows to see how his grand plan was unfolding. "Things are going smoothly," Gary said with a smirk in his voice. "I made sure to be sitting at your desk when Jim walked into the office. The moment he saw me, his face turned red, and he demanded to know what I was doing there. I smiled and said, 'Meet your new partner.' He looked like he'd swallowed a hornet. Watching him read the agreement was the highlight of my week." Gary paused for dramatic effect before continuing. "Things escalated pretty quickly. Jim ordered a fuel truck for the Wilkins site because the equipment was running out of diesel. As soon as he left, I canceled the order. By the time one of the loaders ran dry, Jim was on the warpath yelling at Allied Fuel. They told him it was me who canceled the order and that they wouldn't tolerate his attitude. When he confronted me, I told him the prices were too high and I was looking for better options. That didn't sit well with him. "I heard you two came to blows," I said, intrigued. Gary chuckled. "We did. I overestimated my chances in a fistfight with him. But I got a few kicks in. Let's just say he'll be sore for a while." "Well, keep at it. Looks like everything's going according to plan," I replied, ending the call. After hanging up, I headed to the room I'd turned into my office and sat down at the computer to update my resume. I was ready to start fresh and planned to begin my job search the next day. As I was working, the doorbell rang. Opening it, I found Jim standing there. "What the hell do you want?" I asked coldly. "We need to talk, Rob," he said, looking sheepish. "No, we don't," I replied sharply. "It wasn't my fault," Jim blurted out. "Laura came after me. I was in a bad place, angry about what Annabelle did, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm sorry, but I didn't go after her." "But you knew she was my wife," I shot back. "You knew how it felt when Annabelle cheated on you, and yet you didn't stop to think how it would feel for me. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? You were supposed to be my friend. Even if she threw herself at you, which I seriously doubt, you should have had the decency to say no. I turned Annabelle down when she tried it with me, and you should have done the same. Once might have been a mistake, but you didn't stop at once, did you? You kept going. You betrayed me, Jim, and there's no excuse." "Why'd you sell out to Mellows?" he asked. I stared at him for a moment. "Because if I hadn't, I might have handled things in a way that would have landed me behind bars, and you're not worth that. But I figured Mellows would give you the kind of misery that lasts longer than any fight." Then, without warning, he continued, I punched him. Grabbing his shirt, I yanked him inside, slammed the door shut, and let out every ounce of rage I'd been holding back. By the time I was done, Jim was unconscious. I dragged him to his car, shoved him into the driver's seat, and walked back into the house with a sense of grim satisfaction. If the cops showed up, I'd tell them he came at me first, and that I had no choice but to defend myself. His recent fight with Mellows would only help my case. The next morning, I sent out 14 resumes and called my attorney for an update. He informed me that a hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for Monday, but Laura still hadn't retained legal representation. I considered calling her but decided to wait. The longer she delayed, the more advantage I had. By midweek, I was already getting responses to my job applications. I flew to Atlanta for an interview on Wednesday and Baltimore on Thursday. Both went well, but a call from a San Diego company piqued my interest. I scheduled an interview for the following Tuesday and started imagining what life might be like in a city where the sun rarely took a day off. At Monday's hearing, the judge dismissed the restraining order, granting Laura access to the house. She arrived with her lawyer, but as soon as they approached me, I stopped them. "You don't talk to me without my attorney," I said curtly. "I just wanted to let you know I'll be coming by tonight," Laura said. "No, you won't," I replied flatly. "I'm flying out this afternoon and won't be back until Wednesday. You can come by after 6. Her lawyer started to argue, but I shut him down. She won't step foot in that house unless someone from the court is present to oversee it. She can wait 2 more days. Laura looked at her lawyer and shook her head. "It's fine. I can wait," she said quietly. On Wednesday evening, Laura arrived with someone from her attorney's office. The court-appointed observer showed up shortly after. She introduced herself and explained her role in documenting anything Laura removed from the house. "That's unnecessary," I told her. "She can take whatever she wants." The woman raised an eyebrow. "If that's the case, why make her wait?" "Because she betrayed me," I said bluntly. "Not only did she cheat, But she did it with someone I thought was my best friend. I couldn't kick her, couldn't destroy her life. Not without risking jail. But I could make her feel some of the pain she caused me. It's petty, sure, but it's all I've got. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I let Laura and the man from her lawyer's office inside, then headed outside to mow the lawn. By the time I was done and came back into the house, everyone was gone, except Laura. She was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly sipping tea. She looked up as I entered. "You lied," she said, her voice flat. "You didn't give my things to Goodwill." "Maybe not," I admitted with a shrug. "But I sure did enjoy how angry it made you to think I had." She sighed, setting down her cup. "I didn't think sorting through everything would be this complicated. It's going to take longer than I expected." I pulled my keys from my pocket, removed the house key, and slid it across the table toward her. "Don't bother rushing. You can have the house by Friday. I'll have my stuff out by then." "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "I've been interviewing for jobs," I said. "As soon as I get one, I'm leaving the state." "That's not what I mean," she said. "Why go through all this? The restraining order, the lies about donating my things. If you're just giving me the house and leaving." I crossed my arms. "That's a stupid question. After what you did, I had to do something to get back at you. You're lucky I handled it this way, and not with violence." Laura's lips tightened. "Dragging me through all this nonsense doesn't even come close to making us even," she said. "But I guess it's what you needed to do." "Still, I think we need to talk," she said. "I know you said no earlier, but I'm going to try to convince you that we don't have to go through with this divorce." "Be serious, Laura," I said. "There's no way I can stay married to you after what you did." "That doesn't matter," she insisted. "I love you, Rob. You know I do. What happened with Jim was just a mistake. A stupid, thoughtless mistake. I've always liked Jim, but I never loved him. I love you." I stared at her incredulously. "It doesn't matter whether you loved him or not. You still cheated. You had to know how I'd feel about that after how upset I was when Annabelle betrayed Jim. Remember how I wanted to tell him, but you talked me out of it. That should have clued you in, and don't feed me that I didn't want you to find out crap. Cheaters always get caught. Jim found out about Annabelle because someone told him, just like someone told me about you. Doesn't the fact that I love you count for anything?" she pleaded. "No, Laura," I replied firmly. "Because your love clearly wasn't enough to stop you from betraying me." "It didn't mean anything, Rob," she exclaimed. "It was just a meaningless mistake. An accident, really. How does sleeping with my best friend repeatedly qualify as an accident?" I said, shaking my head. Laura sighed and began her confession. "Jim came by while you were on a trip to Santa Fe. He was in a terrible mood over Annabelle, missing her despite everything. We had a drink, and he started crying. I hugged him, trying to comfort him, but it felt good. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. The next time you went out of town, we both knew why he was coming over. It was never about love. It was just excitement. I never neglected you, Rob. I love you." "We don't have to end things," she said. I laughed bitterly. "Fix it. How? I'll never trust you again. You betrayed me, Laura. If I stayed, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if you'd do it again. And based on what you just admitted, you didn't stop because you loved cheating so much. How am I supposed to believe any promise you make now when you've already broken the one you made when we got married? It's over, Laura. I want a divorce." "I'm not giving up," she said firmly. "I'll fight for us. My lawyer says the court can order counseling, and I know it will help. We'll get through this, Rob. I'm not letting you go." "You still don't get it," I said, exasperated. "It's not about love. I'll admit I still love you, but I can't live with you. Every time I look at you, I'll remember what you did with Jim. I can't live like that." She smirked darkly. "If you try to divorce me, I'll release the video of what you did to Jim. Every family member, every coworker, and all your friends will see it. I'll plaster it across every amateur site I can find." "You're bluffing," I said, calling her out. "Am I?" she replied. I walked to my office, retrieved a copy of the security footage from my briefcase, and handed it to her. "Here," I said, "watch it, then decide if you really want to show this to anyone else." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked away. "You can pick up the house on Friday," I called over my shoulder. "But for now, you need to leave." Over the next 2 days, I packed up my belongings, put most of them in storage, and moved into a temporary apartment at the executive suites. For the following 2 weeks, I traveled across the country for job interviews in Salt Lake City, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, and Detroit. While I felt the interviews went well, I didn't hear back immediately from any of the companies. Sitting at my desk one evening, I reviewed my finances and realized I could survive for 6 years without working. I started researching cities with lower living costs, hoping to stretch my savings further, maybe 8, even 10 years. It was time for a fresh start, somewhere far from Laura and the mess she had created. Laura signed the divorce papers and sent them back to my attorney. For a moment, I almost wished she hadn't. A small part of me would have enjoyed scattering CDs of her and Jim's escapades all over the house for her to find. But a deal's a deal. According to our agreement, we were splitting everything 50-50, and each of us would handle our own legal fees. Since I was the one who initiated the divorce, I bore the cost of my lawyer. Laura got the house, which worked out fine since my share of the equity roughly matched what I still owed the bank. True, I had to give her half of what I made selling my stake in the company, but I planned ahead for that. The other 2/3 were safely hidden in an offshore account. Through the grapevine, I heard an amusing bit of gossip. After I left, Jim began mistreating Laura so aggressively that she had to file a restraining order against him. I didn't care what happened to either of them, but the irony made me laugh. For now, I decided to wait until the divorce was officially finalized before making any big decisions. Soon, companies began responding to the interviews I'd attended. One, based in San Diego, invited me back for a follow-up. I was starting to arrange travel when my phone buzzed. It was Gary Mellows. "How'd you like to own your old company again?" he asked. "Why on earth would I want it back?" I replied. "I sold it to you to get away from Jim." "Why would I willingly become his partner again?" he asked. "You wouldn't have to," Gary assured me. After our last blow-up, I told him that if he hated working with me so much, I'd either buy him out or sell his half to someone else. He didn't even hesitate, asked how much I'd offer. He sold it to me for half of what I paid you. I couldn't help but laugh. And why should I be interested? If you get even half of what you said you would to make Jim's life miserable, the company's probably worth peanuts now. "You might be surprised," he said. "Come by the office and we'll talk." Curiosity got the better of me, so I went. The moment I walked in, Maria jumped up from her desk, gave me a big hug, and then poked her head into Gary's office to let him know I was there. Gary didn't waste any time. "As you know, I only bought your half of the company to mess with Jim," he began. "I never really wanted him as a partner, but things have shifted. I'm focusing more on construction and less on engineering, and I've moved all the equipment and projects to my other company. That left me wondering what to do about the engineering side. I thought about starting fresh, but then I figured, why not just sell the company back to you?" "I don't think I can afford to buy it," I said. "I can't pay for both halves." "You don't have to," Gary said. "The company's value has dropped since I stripped it down. I'll sell it to you for what I paid Jim and throw in a 5-year contract for engineering services. Plus, the company still has contracts with about 15 other firms. You'd be walking into a ready-made client base." When he named the price, I realized it was less than what I had stashed in my offshore account. "There's one condition," Gary added. "I talked this over with Maria. If you agree to the deal, she's staying with you instead of transferring to my company." I nodded. "I don't need time to think. I'm in, but I won't finalize anything until my divorce is settled, which will take another 3 weeks. That works for me, Gary said with a grin. As I left, Maria stopped me. Don't forget, 3 weeks from now, you promised I'd be first on your list. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't think you were serious about that. Her smile lit up the room. Oh, I'm very serious. As I drove away, my phone rang again. This time, it was my lawyer. He informed me that Jim had learned a hard lesson from his experience with Gary. Apparently, Jim had reached out with an offer to settle the lawsuit Gary filed against him. I told my lawyer to accept it. Back at my temporary apartment at the Executive Suites, I couldn't stop smiling. In 3 weeks, I'd be starting over. A new life with a new job, a new girlfriend, and money in the bank. I could have spent that time house hunting and shopping for furniture, but for now, I was just savoring the sweet turn of events. As I sit in my new office, surrounded by blueprints and drafts of projects I once only dreamed of, I can't help but marvel at how far I've come. The past year feels like a distant storm. Its winds were violent, its rain unrelenting. Yet here I am on the other side, not just surviving, but thriving. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, they were all bricks in the road that led me here, teaching me lessons I didn't know I needed to learn. Maria's laughter echoes from the next room as she answers the phone. She's been a constant in my new chapter, as dependable as the sunrise. And though we're taking things slow, there's a warmth between us that feels right. It's not the fiery passion of a whirlwind romance, but something steady and grounded, a foundation you can build on. Funny how life works. The person I needed was always just a few steps away. Professionally, the company has become a blank slate for me to reimagine. Without Jim's toxicity or Laura's shadow looming, I found a clarity that I didn't realize I lacked. Contracts are rolling in, and I'm assembling a team that shares my vision. People who value integrity as much as I do. There's a satisfaction in creating something from the ashes, knowing that every step forward is mine alone. Occasionally, memories of Laura and Jim creep in, unbidden and unwelcome, but they no longer sting. Time has dulled the edges of their betrayal, leaving me with lessons instead of wounds. From Laura, I learned that love without trust is a hollow thing. From Jim, I learned that even the strongest bonds can snap under the weight of selfishness and deceit. Every so often, I hear whispers of their lives. Jim has bounced between jobs, his reputation in tatters. Laura, last I heard, she moved out of state trying to start over. I wish them well, not out of forgiveness, but because their stories are no longer tied to mine. I've untangled myself from their chaos, and I have no intention of looking back. As for me, the days are fuller than ever. I've started mentoring younger engineers, finding joy in helping them navigate challenges I once faced. On weekends, Maria and I explore local trails or lose ourselves in conversation over coffee. There's a lightness in my life now, a sense of purpose, unclouded by doubt or regret. The scars are there, of course, faint reminders of what I've endured, but I wear them with quiet pride, proof that I faced the storm and emerged stronger. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that endings are rarely the end. They're beginnings in disguise, waiting for us to pick up the pieces and start anew. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about what's next. Whatever it is, I know I'll face it with the strength I've gained, the lessons I've learned, and the people who truly matter by my side. Life isn't about the storms we weather, it's about the skies we find afterward. And right now, my skies have never been clearer.